that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we woman and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
And welcome to another program of Open Word, Politics 101, our Open Word edition with Professor Clive Thomas. I would like to welcome all of you, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from Guyana, or you're joining us from the wider Caribbean, or further afield. Welcome to all of you who are joining us from the United States of America, those of you joining us from Canada, and good evening to you who are coming to us. Good night, and perhaps good morning to those of you who are coming to us from Europe, in particular the United Kingdom. Welcome to all of you. We come on air tonight, of course, with the Venezuelan issue still lurking there, and I think push is being made on both sides of the political divide to bring that issue into our consciousness, the national consciousness, the collective consciousness, as is the case always whenever you have an issue like that in a society like ours. It takes some time for it to sink in. We are overburdened with politics every day. That's one of the things about a society like ours. The kind of fatigue, partisan politics, day in, day out. And when issues of this nature, the Venezuelan issue, comes on stream, it takes some time for the society to really pivot and to really soak in the seriousness of that issue. So it's taken some time. It takes some time for people to come to grips with the issue. Of course, the issue itself is going to be initially seen in our partisan lenses. And so we had the meeting with the government and the opposition and the back and forth and so on. Suffice to say that the Venezuelan issue is there. It's not going away. We have talked about it on this program from time to time. And we are going to continue to speak about it. We had the leader of the opposition here. We had Dr. Mark Curtin here. And so we are doing our part in trying to bring the issue to the forefront, but we are doing it as usual in our different way. That thing there that this is the Venezuelan thing and we should all get on board, forget about everything that's happening. That's not our position here. We would like to look at the Venezuelan issue within its larger context, its larger geopolitical context, its linkages to our oil and gas, its linkages to national development, and to look at it in that serious way rather than the hysterical way that we sometimes see that's happening. No wonder people tend to be turned off from that kind of thing. I've heard craziness, everything should be dropped and, it should be Venezuela. Man, no. Venezuela is part of our larger problem and our larger challenge. So here we are. Good evening to all of you. And welcome to our Open Word edition of Politics 101 with Professor Clive Thomas. We're going to be talking today about poverty. Because, of course, that is a clear and present danger. Also, that issue has a lot hanging with it as far as development is concerned. And on this program, we have been talking a lot about it with Professor Clive Thomas. Where we are, what is the poverty rate in Guyana? What is the nature of poverty? How profound, how deep that poverty is, and so forth. And so we're going to be talking about that as we once more put on the front burner the question of poverty alleviation via way of policy. So here we are, Professor Clive Thomas with us. Let's bring him in. Good evening, Professor Thomas.
Good evening, David.
And of course, we are going to be talking about poverty, continuing to talk about poverty. Your column this past week in the Stabrook News, Guyana and the wider world, you did take up that issue. In fact, you've, in a sense, in the last three columns, I would say, that you have begun to look again with a fresh, well, not a fresh eye, but with fresh information, the most recent information at your disposal to look again at poverty. We started off the program by making reference to Venezuela, and I would like to get a quick comment from you as we begin the program. We saw when the issue of oil and gas about a year ago or 2 years ago, there was this poll that showed that Guyanese weren't as engaged with the oil and gas issue. They weren't as interested in the oil and gas issue. You were skeptical about that finding. And I think here we go again, the issue of Venezuela and Venezuela's renewed claim to Guyana's oil and gas, Guyana's territory, and the referendum coming up in Venezuela, etc., etc. There's the worry that the Guyanese population is not as tuned in to that issue as they should. Are you worried about that?
Very much so, David. I think a lot of what you said in the introduction is very intimately connected to the issues we've been discussing concerning poverty. And I'd like to bring them into the discussion because, as I have been stressing from the very outset, the single greatest existential threat to Guyana's oil and gas and all the consequences we've been talking about is the Venezuelan situation. And the Venezuelan situation can't be looked at in isolation from what is happening globally. And that suggests to me that we have to find some means of integrating the existing global wars, both the war in Ukraine and its consequences for the oil and gas sector, the war in Palestine against the Gazans and its oil and gas implications, and also the fact that gas is a destination to the Caribbean population, because like us, they are subject to intensive colonial forces operating against them, including racial and other forces of a genocidal type. And I think we have to integrate all that into this discussion and not isolate it from those global geopolitical issues. And that is why I think that's why I wrote you privately. In fact, I think I messaged you.
Yeah.
To say the issue must be taken up. We have a responsibility, I think, as a nation that endured colonization, to do something, I think, significant in relation to what is happening in Palestine. what is happening in Gaza. It is not an incidental issue. And I think we have, at some points in time, particularly when we are about to emerge as a new force, because we will become a big player in the oil and gas sector, we'll have more status and influence going forward than what we have now. And we have to begin to flex some of that muscle in the international community. It may not be much muscle now, but that influence must be shown in the positions we start to adopt. And I feel that within CARICOM, we have 10 to 12, 13 votes. We can't let them sit idle within the United Nations at a point in time like this. And there's no party in the region that is taking a lead in this matter. And I feel we have a responsibility in the WPA to take a lead on some collective regional position in regard to what is happening in Palestine. These atrocities cannot be allowed to continue without some, at least signal by us as an emerging player, that we are not going to go down the path of the silence. And we have to engage the matter in a way which will also help to protect us, because we can become another Palestine. Because when a country claims 2/3 of a territory, they're not claiming just a piece of your land. They're claiming the equivalent of national extinction. We see it happen in Palestine. We see it happen with Israel and the occupied lands in the Middle East. So we have to be very careful that we don't slip down that slippery slope without paying due regard to it. And that is why I was hoping that maybe at some point in time we could take up these issues. I'm not an expert in geopolitics or international political issues, but I think that it's definitely a period of time where we have to draw the connections and we have to start thinking about the implications for us. So I just want to add that to what you had said in the beginning, to give this program a focus and not let it appear as if it has a separate focus for what we are about to discuss.
And I'm very glad you are making the connections, because I think often that is where the gap is always in the national discourse, certainly in the initial stages. And we have to call upon all the forces in the society to join the discussion so that we can give it the kind of focus that it needs. As I said, I frown on the this issue that we just have to drop everything and just focus on all of us saying no to Venezuela and so on, and not really, and that's important, but not paying attention to the connections. And I'm glad you make the linkage between the wars that are going on in those two centers of the world and what's happening with the Venezuelan issue, and to put that within the context of our emergence as a petro-state. You spoke about the region, and we've had statements from CARICOM in support of Guyana's territorial integrity. But we had, and I don't know if you read about this in the papers, a troubling statement from Prime Minister Motley, who in an address a couple of weeks ago to a conference of the Barbados Labour Party, called on Guyana and Venezuela to maintain the Caribbean as a zone of peace. And it was the equivalence that was given to Venezuela and Guyana, as if Guyana is an aggressor. Have you read of that statement and what you make of it?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen the complete statement. That I'm being quite frank with that. Mm-hmm. I think that's all the danger, but those are the things that we need to discuss and should be active in our foreign affairs. And I believe foreign affairs should be guided to a large extent by national debates. And the government does not seem to be encouraging that. So to some extent, it remains isolated. And that is why I have suggested that maybe a party like the WPA with its traditions of calling for international help when it needed it could consider putting on the front burner some connections to what is going on internationally and try to make it an important agitational dimension of what it's doing within the confines of Guyana-Caribbean.
Professor Clive Thomas here. Professor, I'm sure that we will come back to this Venezuelan issue because that matter is going to be put on the agenda of the Working People's Alliance, and hopefully shortly the party would come out publicly.
I won't mention the suggestions I have here.
Right. The party will come out because certainly we need to bring that broaden focus on the Venezuelan issue. Let's turn our attention to the question of poverty and take our audience back to it was 2018 in Buxton when you made that declaration. It has become known now as the Buxton Proposal, but then it apparently took the nation, especially the rulers of that time and the opposition, the political class, took them by surprise. When you put poverty on the agenda, poverty alleviation, and suggested cash transfers as a means of dealing with the question of poverty. It's been now 5 years since then. There's been a lot of back and forth on that issue. But it has stayed in the headlines. The Trade Union Congress held its annual delegates conference this past week, and
I think they're holding it now.
Yes.
I wanted to mention that I got a letter from them early this morning.
Right. Right.
Started today.
Right.
And they invited me to participate, and I.
Right, really, and the cash transfer is on the front burner of.
Well, they invited me to participate, but I can't be there. I had so many commitments. But today, tomorrow, and Friday when we have to discuss about the future, that I couldn't postpone them.
Right. But
the letter was dated October the 1st. But it was brought to my house late last night, and my wife refused to go to receive it because she didn't know whether the rules or not.
Right.
And when we opened it this morning, it was a letter inviting. It's something that started this morning.
Yeah. But the point is that the issue of cash transfer and poverty is on the front burner there. In revisiting the issue, you have brought us up to date with the latest data on
that is separate. Let me make it clear.
Yeah.
I write these articles well in advance of the publication because I'm writing them as a series of articles. So the actual date of the completion is not so significant as long as they're ahead of the time when they are due to be published. And at this stage, what I'm writing about is a complete revision of the last version that I submitted, which ended on the 7th January 2022. So it was written largely in 2021. And that is being revised now, and it will be an up-to-date version of what it is, sharpen some of the arguments, tighten some issues. And that will be the definitive statement going forward. And I'm hoping before I finish that to sort of look at the figures that we had mentioned in the original version and see how inflation has affected that, and whether we need to revise the formula that we had arrived at and the formulation that we presented. Because going forward, we don't have to keep doing periodic write-overs, but just update the figures.
Yeah. And the updated figures start with the updated figures on poverty in Guyana on a recent report. Yes. And
right. We have right up to the end of 2023 now.
Right, and that's where I want us to start, that UNDP report.
I wrote about that in last Sunday's paper.
Yes, and that's where I want us to start. I want us, in a sense, to give us a refresher course here. First of all, what are the up-to-date figures as far as the poverty in Guyana is concerned? But I want us to start with the what are the indicators that were used to determine poverty in a place like Guyana?
And I would say while there have been many studies written over the years on poverty in Guyana, over the centuries, you might say, a lot of it has been anecdotal and fairly primitive. I think the first serious definitive study from which we could draw important poverty information was the World Bank's Living Standards Measurement Survey of 1992, because that's where I started to my investigation. And that was based on a survey of households in Guyana. Surveyed a sample of every household in Guyana, based on the total of households in Guyana. And that was based on having what is called a poverty line, a level of money income or consumption a family should have to be avoiding poverty. Or in the case of critical poverty, another line which showed only survival income. That's enough to survive, but not to really guarantee life going forward. That's where this early study started. And those continued right up until, I would say, the 1990s, very early 1990s, when the Human Development Reports put out by the United Nations Development Program took over from the World Bank's focus on living standard measurement surveys. The reason for that was that there was a growing criticism of poverty measures that relied on consumption data or income data. Because in a country like Guyana, for example, where a large part of the hinterland community lives on subsistence means of production and consumption of goods, and where money exchanges at the market may not be penetrating totally, it can't be an accurate measure if you use it in market methods to establish how poor, or money methods to establish how poor a family is or a household is. So they've always been a search for other and more far wider means of establishing the level of poverty in a country. And UNDP pioneered that and came up with the Human Development Index. And that incorporated two other variables, not only the standard of living, which is the money or the income or the consumption part of it, but also health and education, which we consider essential means for people to survive in a household or the family. For example, health might depend on the nutritional level of the population, the amount of sanitation there is in the community, the amount of feeding that is offered through public institutions and that type of thing, so as to get a measure of the health that the populations endured during that point in time of the survey. And education would be the things like the main years of schooling, the level of schooling achieved, and that type of thing. That's also an indicator. And the United Nations developed the Human Development Index for global comparisons. And we used to rank something like 100, 190 something, or pretty low among the countries in the world. But that has developed significantly since the early 1990s. And they continue to publish the data in more modified and up-to-date way every year annually. And I think the Oxford University is tasked with the responsibility for maintaining the studies in over 100 developing countries, of which Guyana is one. And their report for 2023 is the report that I cited in the last Sunday's Tabak News column that you have seen, and which will be the latest information that there is. And that shows that poverty has been diminishing to some extent. So our call for the universal basic income is really to speed up the disappearance of poverty. Because of the Human Development Index, we were ranked something like 0.5 back in 1991, which is just a medium level of human development. And today, we ranked at 0.7 out on a scale of 0 to 1, which is a high level of human development. So there's clearly progress that will be made. And that progress represents 40%, a 40% gain in that period of 40-something years. We can see it in some indicators too. For example, our life expectancy has grown on average, well, not on average, has grown totally, and for an average of about three years since 1990 and 1991. So data like that suggests that people living longer and the population is getting relatively more healthy. You also see that in the education sector too. People are spending at least 2.8 years more having formal education than they did back in 1990, suggesting the educational system is improving somewhat, even though slowly. So the remaining bits that we want to get rid of represent something like, which I would say would be the acute levels of unemployment, of poverty, represents something maybe in the single-digit range at this point in time. So that the tasks that we can set ourselves can be rapidly achieved if we were to move to the universal basic income. And that gives me great hope. Because we don't want just to eliminate poverty. We want a society in which people are thriving and going forward, are developing to the level that is commensurate with the resources we have and with the expectations that people must have based on the resources available to us. We don't want to just be taking away poverty. We want to be infusing development and growth in our population till it begins to have lesser and lesser deprivation in any field. And we begin to prosper the human community. And that is the goal we want to transition to. And to be able to do that, we have to clear the decks of all the serious deprivations that come with poverty. And that is how I'm trying to really make the argument going forward.
All right.
That our development strategy must have that goal. So we're not trying to just take the road of poverty. We're trying to make the country maximize what it can do with resources it has available. So our goal is always the goal of rising and rising capabilities among the population, rising and rising opportunities, rising and rising benefits that they should be assured of having just by being a citizen. And once we can do that, I think we can create a generation of people who would see Guyana pivot, or certainly an element or an engine within the forces making for a future Guyana-Caribbean. That is the dream that we have. And I think that is what the data seems to suggest might be within our attainment.
Yeah. Professor, a couple of things before we move on. First of all, let me just give the audience a sense of the indicators that the UNDP is using, and there are 10 of them. nutrition, child mortality, years of schooling, school attendance, cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, and assets. Those are the 10 indicators that are used in measuring where we are in terms of poverty. And just for the sake of the
listen to
viewers,
the article.
yes, I wanted to because that's a question that is being asked, and I'm scrolling it on the screen so that everyone can see the indicators there. 10 of them. So I just wanted to put that in. The other thing I want you to spend a minute on, Professor. You said that the data indicates that we're doing better in terms of poverty when compared to 1990, 1991. And you cite the figures there. But there's always the apparent dissonance between what figures tell us and what people experience in their day-to-day lives. And I'm sure there are people on this program who are saying, look, the data is showing that we are doing better on poverty, but I know people in my community who are not doing better in poverty, as far as poverty is concerned, who are not doing better as far as school attendance is concerned, nutrition, cooking fuel, etc., etc. How do we balance what people are experiencing in their lived reality, their day-to-day reality, and what the data is showing us?
That happens in every country. Because right there where you live in the United States, we have had the lowest rate of unemployment for over 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
People will never believe that capitalism can grow with less than 4% unemployment. You've had the fastest rate of growth over decades, nearly over the last 5 years, than America's ever had, other than coming out of a war or a depression. But most people do look at the sort of studies that have been done, the polls on Biden. 60% of the population think that the things in the United States are getting better, when the objective reality is completely the contrary. So we have to expect that.
But what do you say to people? Yeah, obviously,
you can't criticize them because people don't know better, and anecdotal evidence tends to be the same thing with misinformation. That's why it thrives. It tends to be more easily digested. Then not everybody can tell you they know what they used to do. I've asked people one simple question when I get into that situation. Tell me which person in Guyana doesn't have a phone. How many you think? And they will say, they will admit that almost everybody does. I say, you know, in that telephone, they have more computing power, more information power than anybody in the history of Guyana ever had. Ever had or could hope to have as recently as 20 years ago. Because when we were all going to school, we never figured that a computer would be so easily accessible on a phone. That's when people begin to think of their situation and begin to realize that many things that you come to accept, you take them for granted. It's a hard lesson to teach, and I don't think that we should be battering people against it. Let them feel that way. I don't try to convince them otherwise. But I don't think we can base policy on their views. We have to base policy on what the data tells us. Let people form their views in the community as they see, as they go along. But we can't act to misinformation and treat it as if it's information. We can't legitimize lies or mistruths. Once you get into that world, I don't know where you're going.
Yeah, but could it be that the data is giving us a
data is
general...
always flawed.
Yes.
But if you have consistent data, there's my field too.
Yeah.
People can argue that they think that the national accounts don't capture everything, and I agree. I don't doubt that. So every national account, every country's national account is flawed. But if the entire world is doing the national accounts on one systematic basis, meeting one set of rules that are determined by the United Nations Development, Social, and Economic Council, measuring every value based on their methodology, it tells you something about the world. It may not be accurate literally, but it means that you have a consistent measure with which you can compare different things in different places. And that's the value of it that cannot be replaced. Because once you remove yourself from there, and everything is only because it is different, it must have a different measure, then you have no basis for comparison, no basis for truth, no basis for empiricism. The hard thing to digest, but I'm telling you, that is the only way to go.
Yes.
Because if you leave everybody to give you their own truth, how can we establish a movement forward?
But let me take you in another direction, Professor. So the government is listening to this program. Professor Thomas is saying that the data is showing that there is an improvement as far as poverty is concerned. So therefore, why is he proposing cash transfer and a universal basic income? We are moving in the right direction. Leave it alone. Let's pay attention to those.
Because the
what
goal
do you
of
tell the government? What do you tell the government?
What we tell the government, the goal of politics is not to achieve the minimum. It is to maximize the capabilities of our country. You have to shift the mindset. It can't be just say we can get $1 million, and once you get it, it's back and relax. We're trying to maximize it to go forward. We're trying to make the next generation better than the present generation, the future generation, to continue growing in that way. And the only way you can do that is to maximize in each period of time your capabilities and possibilities. So we have to see progress as an unending thing, not something that is determined by some specific goal you might set yourself in 2024. So it calls for a different mindset, and I think that's why the hardest part of politics is pushing for vision of...
No, I am glad you went there, and I suppose that is why they say, the responsibilities are not always on the interviewee, but the interviewer. Because, when you made that point that we cannot strive for the barest minimum, because I don't want people to go away from this program saying that Clive Thomas is saying that everything is okay in Guyana, all right?
I'm not, in fact, to the contrary.
Right. And that is why I wanted to press you on, yes, we are doing better, but as you say, we cannot strive for the minimum, the barest minimum. We have to try to do better, because sometimes these things change, not because of what governments do, but sometimes in spite of the governments. Am I wrong there?
Inside the government, of course.
Yeah.
The improvement of the index from 0.5 to 0.7 has almost all to do with Exxon, the same company we hate, because they found oil.
Right.
And the spillover effects onto us.
Right.
Generate that outcome.
Right. And that's what
I would never start out by giving them the praise.
That's right. And I don't want the government to say, look, Clive Thomas and David Hines were discussing poverty. And Thomas admits that we are doing better. Poverty is not as bad as it used to be. Therefore, we have no need for his proposals for a universal basic income. I do not want them to do that because I can see and hear them champing at the bit to do that and say he's contradicting himself, you know, and so I don't want that at all. Yes, go ahead.
Saying that politics is not setting a goal that is not moving.
Yes.
It has to be a ever upwards target. You can't be satisfied. And by human nature, that's what we are. We want to grow. We want to be more educated, to be more wealthy, to have better standards of living. You want to be improved, or whatever our particular goals are. You want to be a better writer. You want to be a better doctor. We don't want to just be a doctor that is like any other doctor, not growing or exercising status, or showing status. You have to be growing all the time. That's what human beings do. They grow.
So armed with this information, this new information, this updated information from the UNDP as regards poverty in Guyana, how then does that affect your initial proposals for a cash transfer policy and universal basic income?
But it makes the achievement of the task relatively easier than it was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what I'm pointing to, and therefore gives urgency to the need for us to do it, because there's still persistent poverty. There's still poverty among our ranks that should not be there.
Right.
Given the resources that we have. So once we are there with these blotches of society, we need to clear them up. We can't sit back and let nature evolve itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the task of politics, the task of policy, the task of the government and the people in the supporting the government are without giving the government support. The people in the country need to see themselves as growing all the time. I'm not trying to achieve, one position, one goal, but goals that keep multiplying as you go forward. There's always a struggle to improve.
Yeah. And as you said, there's still poverty, there's still persistent poverty. This UNDP puts the poverty rate somewhere around 40%, 39% or thereabout.
It used to be when it started the survey, it used to be in the 40s. I think right now it's probably close to that still. Because what they've been doing, how they've been doing it, is to raise the minimum income required to be above poverty. In other words, they take the measure from the rest of the globe.
Mm-hmm.
So poverty is now seen relatively. So there's no absolute goal to be achieved. You don't have to achieve $100 or $1 per day. No. Because $1 per day back in 1990 is far less, or was far more than $1 today, because $1 today means nothing much. So you have to keep raising the goal. So right now the goals are you have to meet minimal like 550 and 750, but they expect the world to have rising expectations.
So the UNDP puts our rate where, and that's what I'm asking. I mean, in your
they calculate a basket, and right now I think the basket is relative.
Yes,
it's somewhere between $5.50 per day and $7 per day.
And $7.
Yes,
that puts our poverty rate at around 39%. I'm seeing here.
I don't think it's as high as 39 now. In the 30s, though.
Yes, but I'm just going by what the UNDP is saying, and then I'll come to what you think where you think it is.
Well, I'm using the data published by the Oxford University that is contracted to provide the measures. based on the data they send them.
Right. The data they, meaning they mean the government.
UNDP.
Yes.
Not the UNDP has offices in every country.
In Georgetown, right. In Guyana. Right. And so they're gathering the data independent of the government?
No, they use the government data as well.
They use the government data. So we have to stress that this is based on the government data.
And that's produced by the Bureau of Statistics.
Produced by the Bureau of Statistics. All right. And as we said in this program, we trust that data.
There's trust and trust. I don't think there's a deliberate massage.
Right. We said that. Well, let me put it another way. That the data is reliable or relatively reliable. What?
No, the data is not massaged.
The data is not massaged.
Data is what is collected. So you have to look at the methodologies that they use and so on.
And as an economist,
because I work with them, I don't want to say that they would submit false data. I never send the evidence for that.
Right. But I just want to make it very clear, because what I'm saying, there are people in the audience here who are saying, all right, maybe knowing the government, maybe they may be forcing people at the Bureau there to massage the statistics. Maybe it's not as reliable as it is. The point you're making is that
that's a threat in every environment.
Right.
The point I'm making, that threat exists in every environment in the world. You can imagine from being happy when they send him data that he doesn't like, or Biden, and they still have to take it. It depends on the culture developed within the institutions, the professionalism of the institutions. It depends on the training of the people who work in these institutions. And it includes the vision that they have of themselves. So all these things have been part of a development project. So that there's some things that are sacred, like in the market. You get market information, but it's not always coming from you as the source finding it. It comes from other people. They can always manipulate, they can lie to bias it in their favor. So you have to develop a tradition of trying to make it, I would say, criminal to submit wrong information.
But of course, it's not criminal to submit wrong information.
It is criminal. Because it could be committing fraud. See what's happening to Trump? Right now, the case is that they submitted wrong information deliberately to reduce paying taxes. And they submitted on the same information base, different information, so as to get loans.
Have we ever had instances in Guyana where international agencies have charged our Bureau of Statistics with not giving them reliable information?
They have been critical, like some institutions like the World Bank and the IMF rank their data sources and make it a part, and UNDP make it a part of a compulsory reporting. The reliability of data. And they create a certain international embarrassment for the bureaus because they list them. And if you go to the sites, you can see where they would list their dissemination of data and the information and their judgment of its quality. So Guyana has to advance to certain levels of efficiency and effectiveness to be given loans, because they are investing their money in you too, and they don't want the money to disappear. So sometimes they link it to the efficiency of loans, or to whether they're willing to lend you or not. When you hear IDP or some other institution doesn't want a particular contractor to work in the country, It's not the IDP that finds that out. They have a whole set of people in NGOs and things working all around the world who are looking for these evidences of corruption and crookery. And then they reported the IDB, and the IDB and all these institutions have what they call as due diligence officers, who are hired specifically to keep them from becoming public thieves or corruptors. So the entire department of the IDP dedicated to doing this, and you can write them and ask them for information. Anybody can write and ask.
So we accept the reliability of the data.
And we accept the relative reliability.
Reliability of the data until proven otherwise.
Otherwise, yeah.
Until proven otherwise. So, Professor, here we are. We've got this information. You are working on revising the proposal for the cash transfers, and to really bring it up to speed with the data. Do we run the risk? Do we run the risk of not going back on where we were 30 years ago as far as poverty is concerned? But do we run the risk of stagnation?
We run the risk of the oil money being misspent.
Yes.
Because remember, this is an infusion which is coming externally.
Yes.
And therefore should not cause any domestic macroeconomic problems.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's adding resources to Guyana. So it's not like we can create an inflation out of it or a macroeconomic disturbance. Because what we allegedly spending are resources that are coming from outside the country to the national accounts. And from there, we are hoping to build a better Guyana. That's the team that is working.
So it's a matter of...
If resources are generated internally only, we'd have all sort of problems of inflation, printing cash, and all these things. But this cannot happen in this situation in the short run, largely because the resources that are coming in are external to the economy. So they provide foreign exchange and any pressure on the balance of payments. That supplies the foreign exchange to buy from overseas. It's like a safety valve when want to get in the income from outside the economy. It prevents the explosion or depression or inflation or whatever it is that might happen into the macroeconomic economy. You still have to regulate it. But it's a valve that is letting in resources external to what is happening in the national economy.
But doesn't the government have to prioritize poverty alleviation for there to be... yeah?
It has to, yes, but they're trying to do it indirectly. They're saying that you don't have to focus on poverty, except incidentally in giving out cash transfers.
Yes.
Because they can then direct the transfers to who they want to give it to, and become something like a bribery scheme. That's the danger of not having a legalized, constitutionally mandated transfer mechanism. Once you leave to the government and the intentions of different ministers or different schemes to come up with in the party, then you have no control over the mechanism.
And your preference is for it not to be done directly, but for it to be directly done, targeted, for it to be intentionally targeted.
Yeah, but it be targeted to every household.
Right. And it becomes
becomes part of a state-regulated program, like how you give national insurance or whatever it is.
Right.
That is why we recommend a feasibility study for the establishment of the transfer mechanism. The mechanism itself has to be legislated into law.
But that's where I was going. That's where I was going. What you want is for it to be legislated.
By law.
By law,
as
yes.
As an organ of the state.
Yes.
Run by the state.
Right.
And
that does not seem to be the preference of this government.
But they don't like it, no.
Right. Professor Clive Thomas here giving us some more details on this proposal for cash transfers, and we're getting there. The government is looking at dealing with poverty indirectly. Professor Thomas is saying no. In order to speed up the alleviation of poverty, it has to be a direct policy, and it has to be legislated. So that if and when a new government comes in, it doesn't go about and do its own thing because it's dealing there with something that is legislated. Of course, the new government can unlegislate it, but at least a new government comes in, it's legislated. That's one of the benefits, Professor Thomas, yes?
Yes, of course. And we could also, because it's legislated, we can make it a constitutional provision as well.
Yes.
There's no limit to
what we can do. And so we are learning here because as I said, sometimes we hear these things and say, well, yeah, anybody can do cash transfer. But we are talking here about making it part of the law, making it part of the law. And that is the difference between what we are asking for and what we are fighting for and what the government is doing now.
And those are called ad hoc handouts.
Ad hoc, right.
Those are called ad hoc handouts.
Right.
This is why we call them ad hoc handouts.
Right. And we are saying that is not sustainable. That is not sustainable. And that we want it to be legislated. Professor Thomas, have you begun to do the adjustments yet?
About the levels of spending and so on?
Yes.
No, I'm not finishing that. No.
Right.
That's going to be the last thing, probably.
That will be the last thing. But at least we are making the point that a proposal that was made 5 years ago, we're not sitting on our laurels and saying, well, it was made 5 years ago, the world hasn't changed. We are acknowledging that things have changed in 5 years, and any serious policy making initiative
has to recognize that.
Exactly, that there are changes, and we are brought up to date in terms of where poverty is. We've seen some shift, but there is still persistent poverty. And so the shift does not mean that there is not need anymore for a direct and surgical operation to deal with poverty. In fact, it makes the case even more urgent.
And also, I don't know what will be the outcome because I can't prejudge it. But if, for example, we take into account inflation, we will have to adjust all the values back to the inflation level, which means that if inflation has occurred, it will have to be a higher rate. This means that those who qualified under the lower rate will not, as escaping poverty, would not qualify under the higher rate. You follow? So that
yes.
slippage that happened before will have to be corrected. And payments that were made before that were less than inflation was should have been paid, but have to be rectified. In other words, what we do is we establishing the relativity of the value of the 5,000 US. So those, if it's really worth let's say some figure now. It has to show how it grew annually. So people given at different points in time in the past will have to be rectified or compensated for the gap based on a $5,000 payment. You follow?
Yes, I'm following. All right. Professor Clive Thomas here. I think we have come to that time. Thank you, Professor, for another week.
Mention it, David.
Open Word, and we come back next week and we'll pick up this discussion from where we leave it this week. Thank you, Professor Thomas. And to thank you in the audience for staying with us. Of course, these are matters that are important. As we said at the top of the program, at the beginning of the program, that the Venezuelan issue is not an issue that is in isolation. Venezuela, poverty alleviation, geopolitics, the wars that are going on, they're all intertwined. They're all intertwined. So, see you all tomorrow.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region for we woman.